What happens when a beloved country music superstar comes face to face with one of television's most controversial hosts? You won't believe what unfolds when Blake Shelton sits down with Jenna Bush Hager on Today with Jenna Friends, expecting a lighthearted chat about his latest projects, only to find himself trapped in a verbal minefield that would leave viewers speechless and industry insiders questioning everything they thought they knew about daytime television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in what witnesses are calling the most explosive confrontation in morning show history. The tension was palpable from the moment Blake Shelton walked onto the Today Show set that morning. What should have been a promotional appearance for his upcoming tour quickly devolved into a heated exchange that had production assistants scrambling and network executives fielding angry phone calls before the show even finished. Airing, the country music icon, known for his easygoing demeanor and quick wit, found himself in an unexpected battle of words with Jenna Bush Hager, whose aggressive questioning style has become her trademark signature move that guests either love or absolutely despise. The interview began innocently enough, with Jenna welcoming Blake to the show with her characteristic smile that many industry insiders describe as more calculated than genuine. Blake, dressed casually in his signature plaid shirt and cowboy hat, seemed relaxed as he settled into the guest chair, completely unaware that he was about to become the latest victim of what critics are calling Jenna's increasingly hostile interview tactics. "Blake, it's so wonderful to have you here," Jenna began, her voice carrying that sweet tone that veteran talk show watchers have learned to recognize as a warning sign. "I have to say, your fans are absolutely devoted to you, but there's been some chatter lately about your personal life that I think we need to address head-on." Blake's smile faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing as he processed what Jenna had just said. The camera captured the exact moment when his relaxed posture shifted, his shoulders tensing as he realized this wasn't going to be the friendly chat his publicist had promised him it would be. "Well, Jenna, I'm here to talk about my music and my upcoming tour," Blake replied, his voice maintaining its friendly tone despite the obvious irritation beginning to creep in around the edges. "That's what we agreed on when we booked this appearance." But Jenna wasn't backing down. Instead, she leaned forward in her chair with that predatory gleam in her eyes that regular viewers have come to recognize as her hunting mode, the moment when she spots weakness and decides to pounce with ruthless precision. "Oh, but Blake, your fans want to know about the real you," she pressed, her voice taking on a more aggressive edge that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "They want to know about the controversies, the behind-the-scenes drama, the things that your carefully crafted public image tries so hard to hide from them." Blake's jaw clenched visibly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as he fought to maintain his composure. The camera zoomed in closer, capturing every micro-expression as the country star struggled to process what was happening to him in real time. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Jenna," Blake said slowly, his Oklahoma drawl becoming more pronounced as his stress levels began to rise. "But I came here in good faith to promote my work, not to be ambushed with whatever tabloid nonsense you've been reading." The audience could feel the temperature in the studio rising as Jenna's co-hosts exchanged worried glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction their colleague was taking this interview. But Jenna seemed energized by Blake's obvious discomfort, feeding off his growing frustration like a predator sensing wounded prey. "Ambushed?" Jenna laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "Blake, I'm just asking the questions that America wants answered. Isn't that what journalism is all about? Getting to the truth, even when it's uncomfortable?" Blake's face was beginning to flush red, his famous temper starting to show through the cracks in his professional facade. Veterans of the country music industry know that Blake Shelton is not a man who tolerates disrespect, and Jenna was pushing every single button he had with surgical precision. "This isn't journalism, Jenna," Blake shot back, his voice rising slightly as his patience began to wear thin. "This is a gotcha game, and I didn't sign up to be your target practice for the day." The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of cameras still rolling, capturing every second of this rapidly deteriorating situation. Production assistants could be seen in the background, frantically whispering into their headsets as they tried to figure out how to salvage what was supposed to be a simple promotional interview. Jenna's smile never wavered, but her eyes had taken on a cold, calculating quality that made even seasoned television professionals in the audience feel uncomfortable. She was clearly enjoying Blake's discomfort, reveling in her ability to rattle someone who was usually unflappable in media situations. "Oh, Blake," she said with mock sympathy, "are you saying you can't handle a few tough questions? I thought country music stars were supposed to be tough guys who could handle anything life throws at them." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, and Blake's face darkened as he realized just how deep a hole Jenna was determined to dig for both of them. The other co-hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs, clearly wishing they were anywhere else in the world at that moment. Blake leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked on Jenna's face as he made a visible effort to control his temper. "Let me tell you something, Jenna," he said, his voice low and dangerous in a way that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've sat through thousands of interviews. I know the difference between tough questions and cheap shots." The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and viewers at home could sense that something explosive was about to happen. Jenna had clearly crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she seemed determined to push even further, apparently convinced that controversy would make for better television ratings. "So what you're saying is that you only want to answer the easy questions?" Jenna pressed, her voice dripping with false innocence. "That you want to control the narrative and only talk about what makes you look good?" Blake's hands were visibly shaking now, whether from anger or adrenaline, and the cameras captured every tremor as he struggled to maintain even a semblance of professional composure. The man who had charmed audiences for decades was being systematically dismantled by a host who seemed to take genuine pleasure in making her guests uncomfortable. But what Jenna didn't realize was that she had just lit a fuse that was about to explode in ways she never anticipated, setting the stage for a confrontation that would leave the entire entertainment industry talking for weeks to come. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Blake's chair creaking as he shifted his weight forward, his entire body language screaming danger to anyone who knew how to read the warning signs. Jenna, however, seemed oblivious to the storm she had just unleashed, her confidence bordering on arrogance as she prepared to deliver what she clearly thought would be the killing blow to Blake's carefully maintained composure. "Since you brought up controlling narratives, Blake," Jenna continued with that saccharine smile that had become her weapon of choice, "let's talk about your recent statements about supporting traditional values while simultaneously working in an industry that many of your fans feel has abandoned those same values. Don't you think that makes you a bit of a hypocrite?" The word hypocrite hung in the air like a slap across the face, and Blake's reaction was immediate and visceral. His entire body went rigid, his hands clenching into fists as he processed what Jenna had just accused him of in front of millions of viewers. The cameras caught every detail of his transformation, from frustrated guest to genuinely angry man who had been pushed too far. "Excuse me?" Blake's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than if he had been shouting. "Did you just call me a hypocrite on national television?" Jenna's co-hosts were now openly staring at her in horror, clearly recognizing that she had crossed a line that should never have been approached, let alone obliterated. One of them, a veteran broadcaster who had seen countless interviews go sideways, began making subtle hand gestures toward the control room, silently pleading for someone to intervene before this situation spiraled completely out of control. But Jenna was in full attack mode now, seemingly intoxicated by her own power and completely deaf to the warning signals that everyone else in the studio was desperately trying to send her. She leaned back in her chair with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards, apparently convinced that Blake would simply absorb her attacks and smile for the cameras, like so many other guests had done before him. "Well, Blake, I'm just pointing out what a lot of people are thinking," she said with a shrug that was clearly calculated to appear casual, but came across as deeply disrespectful. "You talk about family values and tradition, but then you profit from an industry that many conservatives believe is corrupting American culture. How do you reconcile that contradiction? Blake's face had gone from red to white, a sure sign to anyone who knew him that he was moving past anger into something much more dangerous. His voice, when he finally spoke, was controlled in a way that made everyone in the studio nervous, like the calm before a devastating storm. "Let me get this straight, Jenna," Blake said slowly, each word carefully measured and delivered with precision. "You invited me on your show under false pretenses, ambushed me with loaded questions, and now you're sitting there calling me a hypocrite while hiding behind the pretense of journalism?" The accusation of false pretenses hit Jenna like a physical blow, and for the first time since the interview began, her confident facade showed the tiniest crack. But instead of backing down or attempting to de-escalate the situation, she doubled down on her aggressive approach, apparently believing that continuing to attack was her only option. "I'm not hiding behind anything, Blake," she shot back, her voice taking on a defensive edge that viewers at home could clearly detect. "I'm doing my job, which is to ask the hard questions that other interviewers are too scared to ask. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing publicity interviews." The suggestion that Blake couldn't handle tough interviews was the final straw, and everyone in the studio could see the exact moment when his famous self-control finally snapped. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shifted forward, his entire posture radiating barely contained fury. "You want to talk about handling things, Jenna?" Blake's voice was rising now, his Oklahoma accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions took over. "Let's talk about how you handle being a professional interviewer. Because what you're doing right now isn't journalism, it's a hit job. And you're doing it because you think controversy sells better than actual content." Jenna's eyes flashed with something that looked like genuine anger for the first time in the interview, as if Blake had touched on something that cut deeper than she was prepared for. The mask of professional composure was starting to slip, revealing something uglier underneath. "How dare you question my professionalism?" she snapped, her voice losing the sweet tone she had maintained throughout the interview. "I've been doing this job longer than you've been pretending to be America's sweetheart country boy. Don't lecture me about journalism when you're just another celebrity who wants to be treated with kid gloves." The personal attack on Blake's authenticity and career hit its mark, and his response was immediate and explosive. He shot up from his chair so quickly that it nearly tipped over, his full height and presence suddenly dominating the small studio space in a way that made everyone else seem tiny by comparison. "Pretending?" Blake's voice boomed through the studio, causing several audience members to jump in their seats. "Lady, I've been busting my tail in this business since before you knew what a television camera was. I've earned every bit of success I've had, and I sure as hell don't need some privileged talking head questioning my authenticity." The reference to Jenna's privileged background was a direct hit that everyone in the entertainment industry would recognize and understand. Blake had just called out her family connections and advantages in the most public way possible, and Jenna's face went pale as she realized that her target had just turned the tables on her in spectacular fashion. "That's completely out of line," Jenna said, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier in the interview. "My background has nothing to do with this conversation." Blake laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Your background has everything to do with this conversation, Jenna. You sit there in your designer clothes, in your handed-to-you job, judging people who actually work for what they have. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Look in a mirror." The studio had gone completely silent, except for the mechanical sounds of cameras still rolling, capturing every second of this nuclear meltdown in high definition. Production assistants were frantically gesturing to each other, but no one seemed to know how to stop what was happening without making it even worse. Jenna's co-hosts had become mere spectators to the destruction, their faces showing a mixture of horror and fascination as they watched their colleague get systematically dismantled by a guest who had clearly reached his breaking point. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. "You don't know anything about me or what I've worked for," Jenna said, but her voice was shaking now, and Blake sensed weakness like a predator sensing wounded prey. "I know enough," Blake replied, his voice carrying the weight of years of frustration with entitled media personalities. I know you think you can tear people down to build yourself up. I know you hide behind the camera and throw stones at people who are actually out there creating something meaningful. And I know that this interview is over. But as Blake turned toward the edge of the stage, Jenna made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation, not realizing she was about to trigger the final explosion that would end this confrontation in the most dramatic way possible. "Blake, wait," Jenna called out, her voice cracking with desperation as she saw her interview spiraling into complete disaster. "You can't just walk away when things get difficult. That's not how this works. You agreed to be here, and running away just proves that everything I've been saying about you is true." The accusation stopped Blake dead in his tracks, his entire body going rigid as the implications of what Jenna had just said sank in. Slowly, deliberately, he turned back to face her, and the look in his eyes made everyone in the studio take an involuntary step backward. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing the moment when a man pushed beyond his limits finally decided he had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Running away?" Blake's voice was deadly quiet, but it carried to every corner of the studio with crystal clarity. "You think I'm running away from you? Lady, I've faced down drunk cowboys, angry record executives, and tabloid reporters who make you look like amateur hour. You don't scare me, and you sure as hell don't intimidate me." Jenna's face flushed red as she realized her final gambit had backfired spectacularly, but she was in too deep to stop now. Her career, her reputation, everything she had built was on the line, and she was fighting like a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. "Then, sit back down and finish this interview like a professional," she demanded, her voice shrill with barely controlled panic. "Stop throwing a tantrum just because someone finally had the courage to ask you real questions instead of lobbing you softballs about your latest album." The word tantrum was the final insult Blake was willing to tolerate, and his response was immediate and devastating. He strode back toward Jenna's chair with purpose, his full presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room as he prepared to deliver what everyone watching knew would be the killing blow to this entire charade. "You want real questions, Jenna?" Blake's voice boomed through the studio, causing the microphones to distort slightly from the sheer volume. "Here's a real question for you. Who the hell do you think you are? You sit behind that desk like some kind of judge and jury, tearing people down for entertainment, and you have the audacity to call it journalism?" Jenna opened her mouth to respond, but Blake wasn't finished. Years of frustration with entitled media personalities, fake journalists, and celebrity culture vultures came pouring out in a torrent that left everyone in the studio speechless. "You want to know what's real?" Blake continued, his voice rising with each word. "Real is getting up at 4 in the morning to work on a farm before school. Real is playing honky-tonk bars for $20 a night and sleeping in your car. Real is earning every single thing you have through blood, sweat, and actual talent, instead of having it handed to you because of your last name." The personal attack hit Jenna like a physical blow, and tears began forming in her eyes as she realized that Blake had just systematically destroyed her credibility in front of millions of viewers. But he wasn't done yet, and everyone could sense that the worst was still to come. "You talk about traditional values like they're some kind of punchline," Blake pressed on, his voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction. "But those values built this country, and they built the music industry that pays your salary. Respect, hard work, treating people with dignity, concepts that are apparently foreign to you, and whatever passes for journalism these days." Jenna's co-hosts were frozen in their seats, watching in horror as their colleague got completely annihilated by a guest who had clearly reached his breaking point. The control room was in chaos, with producers frantically debating whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue to its inevitable conclusion. "I don't have to sit here and take this," Jenna said weakly, but her voice lacked any real conviction. She had been thoroughly outmatched, and everyone in the studio knew it. "No, you don't," Blake agreed, his voice suddenly calm in a way that was somehow more threatening than when he had been shouting. "But you started this fire, so you're going to sit there and watch it burn. You want it real? You want it authentic? This is what it looks like. when you push a real person too far. Blake turned to face the cameras directly, ignoring Jenna completely as he spoke directly to the audience at home. Folks, I came here today to talk about my music and my tour. But instead I got ambushed by someone who thinks destroying people makes for good television. I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between tough questions and cheap shots. And what you just witnessed was nothing but cheap shots from someone who has never earned an honest day's pay in her life. The direct address to the camera was a masterstroke that completely bypassed Jenna and the show's format, making Blake the narrator of his own story instead of remaining a victim of hers. Jenna sat in stunned silence, realizing that she had lost complete control of her own show. I've got better things to do with my time than sit here and be insulted by someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world. Blake continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had reclaimed his power. My fans deserve better than this garbage, and frankly, so do yours. With that, Blake reached up and removed his wireless microphone, the small gesture somehow carrying more dramatic weight than any grand exit could have achieved. The tiny electronic device hit the coffee table with a sharp click that seemed to echo through the entire studio. Blake, please. Jenna tried one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. We can start over. We can talk about your music. Blake paused at the edge of the stage and looked back at her one final time, his expression mixing pity with contempt in a way that made Jenna shrink back in her chair. Some things can't be started over, Jenna, he said quietly. Some lines can't be uncrossed. You showed your true colors today, and now everyone gets to see what kind of person you really are underneath all that makeup and media training. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Blake's boots on the studio floor as he walked toward the exit. No one moved, no one spoke, and no one seemed to know what to do next. Jenna sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her face as the full magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. Blake paused at the studio door, his hand on the handle, and turned back one final time to address the stunned audience and crew. To everyone who works on this show, you deserve better than this, he said, his voice carrying genuine sympathy for the production staff who had been caught in the crossfire. To the viewers at home, demand better from your entertainment. And to you, Jenna, maybe it's time to find a new line of work, because this sure isn't journalism. With those final words, Blake Shelton walked out of the Today Show studio, leaving behind a scene of complete devastation. Jenna sat in stunned silence, her career potentially in ruins, while her co-host struggled to figure out how to salvage what remained of the show. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath, as the entertainment industry witnessed one of the most spectacular meltdowns in television history. The confrontation that had started as a simple promotional interview had ended with a beloved country music superstar delivering a masterclass in standing up to media bullies, while simultaneously exposing the ugly reality of celebrity journalism that prioritizes controversy over truth. Blake Shelton had walked onto that stage as a guest, but he walked out as something else entirely, a man who had refused to be diminished by someone who mistook cruelty for courage and destruction for journalism. As the studio door closed behind him with a final, definitive click, everyone left behind knew they had just witnessed something that would be talked about, analyzed, and remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling and the lights went down.